So firstly, thank you so much for everyone who has joined in today afternoon on this Friday evening. And we kind of want to tell that this is a webinar for exclusively discussing Q&A submitted by you and any other questions that you might have for our team. And you've been trying to reach us, and the inflow of queries has been increasing rapidly in the past few weeks with the growing community that we have on our hands. And so we figured that it might be a good opportunity to just have this interactive session with you all so that you can learn from each other's questions at the same time, get someone on one time, with our specialists. So we have our corporate engagement specialist, Dhruvi Nasaria, today with us. And she was previously the marketing and partnership head for Wishberry, which is India's biggest crowdfunding platform. And she has been with us right from the very start, and she's been heading our corporate engagement function. So all the questions around that would be directed to her. And then we have a science and technology specialist, Siddharth Pede, who was previously with Just and who was working on their plant-based protein egg in the US in Silicon Valley. He's also worked previously with General Mills in USA and Rutgers Food Incubation Center, USA, and with Nestle in India. So given that there's a really nice team of business, markets, consumer insights, and science and technology that we have here today. So great, let's get started. Siddharth, this question is for you. Actually, I'll start with Dhruvi first. Dhruvi, what are the key requirements for a team to have while going to a startup related, which is, if they're thinking of a plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy startup, what things should they keep in mind in terms of building a team?
Right. Firstly, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us here and for spending Friday afternoon with us answering these questions. This is a really good question, especially because everybody is sort of having the time right now to be at home due to whatever's going on in the global health crisis. But because of that, really relook at their organizational structures and relook at how a startup should be formed if they're thinking of launching one, right? So I think what I would recommend, especially for this space, is to have a very diverse team. So you need to have a good mix from business and technical sides to really make a good team in the sector. Especially on the technical side, and Siddharth will obviously, give you a little more overview on that front. But one thing that I have learned is the first person you need to hire is a food scientist, because this person is sort of well-rounded and they have a holistic approach to food science and food formulation in general. And they can then go ahead and help you hire very specific experts, whether that's to do with fermentation or whether that is to do with specific engineering and using of certain kind of machinery. In terms of marketing and business expertise, you can obviously also make use of consultants if you don't need to hire someone full-time, but you need to have that kind of expertise present in your team. Another point that I definitely like to mention is that having a really good board of advisors is very helpful. So, these people may not be on your team full time, but people who have a lot of experience in the FMCG sector, people who have experience with dealing with logistics and warehousing, having their expertise and inputs from time to time also gives you legitimacy in front of investors, and more so helps you really move forward quicker because you get to learn a lot from the experience.
Great, that makes a lot of sense, Ruby, and I think it gives some sort of a roadmap for some of the audience members who joined from the startup area and business area. Siddharth, the next question is for you. What is the best way to build knowledge in this space? Again, like a lot of people don't have a food scientist in-house or sometimes cannot afford right at the very start, especially from the early stage innovation ecosystem, entrepreneurs who are just starting out, who have some idea. They themselves might be from a technical background, engineering background, have some understanding of what food processing or food science is, but are not a food scientist and don't have that in their team. So other than GFI resources, and also including GFI resources, how do they navigate and start learning about this area to develop their own capacity so that they can do better decisions of hiring the right people, thinking in the right way for the next couple of years in terms of new product development, etc., etc.
Yeah, Shardul, so that's a good question. So I would say that GFI is, again, it has a lot of resources right from end to end, right? So as we always say, when it comes to development of plant-based, fermentation or cultivated products, there is, and especially plant-based, there's crop side of it, there is developing raw material side of it, and there's the end product side of it. And GFI has a lot of white paper articles on each of these three aspects. And the way these white paper articles have been written, again, scientists at GFI have compiled a lot of information from research articles and put it in a more simpler format to understand. So I would say that, GFI would be the number one resource to go to. But in addition to that, there are other organizations too working in the space. There is New Harvest, which is another, a donor-funded NGO organization, which is, which gives out grants, publishes some white paper articles, which is good to go through. Always keep checking out, companies like Impossible beyond just on what they are doing, and, their products. And I would say that in general, like for plant-based foods, these are finally food products after all, right? So just having basic food science knowledge and going through basic food science resources. So like in terms of food chemistry, there's they call it the Bible of food chemistry, like Panama's food chemistry, going through that textbook. So there are different resources and ways of approaching this, I would say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And since Varun has also joined us, Varun, would you have anything to add here on this specific question in terms of how people can learn more, not just from GFI's resources, but in general, how to navigate the science and technology aspect of this sector?
Yeah, I think so. There are building blocks that are not associated with directly learning about the plant-based meat and cultivated and fermentation-based meat sectors. So you could look, as Siddharth said, at textbooks that are more basic in nature. Yeah, I mean, in terms of reading and doing a lot of deep diving into our sector, I would strongly recommend everyone take our open online course. It's going to be the best and easiest way for you to get a quick overview of what's going on in the sector and how you can get involved. Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say, Shardul, beyond the textbook that Siddharth mentioned. But also, I should mention that many online platforms now at this time, because of COVID-19 and people sitting at home, are offering a ton of free resources. So many of these textbooks now are opened up by Springer and all these other publishers online. So you might want to just go and look at it. I think all these things are being circulated online.
Yeah, and another good idea to just get a lot of new technical details about what companies are trying is follow people who have been working in this area. A lot of them are actively posting stuff on LinkedIn. So, for example, entrepreneurs who sign up for our community and fill up the entrepreneur intake form get access to all the startups that are currently present in this sector and are externally available with their details, like what products they're making, their website. Just going on those, kind of seeing what ingredients are working well, how they're hiring, like going through their hiring page, looking for their overall strategy when they are putting out posts on LinkedIn. Sometimes there are people who are mission aligned who are also decoding some of their patents, like from the past years or past 2 years, like how companies like Impossible Beyond Just or cultivated meat, eggs and dairy companies, if they filed some patents which are now in the public domain, there are people who are decoding that on their blogs, kind of explaining other people. So it's very collaborative community even in the US. What we'll be also doing is after some time, we'll be adding all our members from the GFI India community to specific channels on Slack and help you collaborate and understand some of this information a little better with our global counterparts. So that will happen in a couple of months or so. So thank you so much for asking that question. I think one more question here was from students, right, who are part of our community or early stage researchers, Siddharth, that none of this is really part of college curriculum in India, which is true. Like I was a food scientist a few years ago studying food science technology. We are not taught currently about plant-based meat, eggs and dairy sector or, the smart protein sector. Do you have any, open access resources or courses that you have as recommendations that people can do on the side?
Yeah, Shardul. So as Varun was mentioning, GFI has an open access course, which we can send out links to, which, in brief, talks about what is plant-based meat, egg, dairy, what is fermentation-based meat, egg, dairy, and cultivated meat, and how do you make it. In addition to that, right now, we are actually teaching a course at Hebrew University in Israel on plant-based and cultivated meat, egg, dairy, which we plan to also introduce in universities in India. And for that, we have been in talks with a lot of universities, be it NIFTEM, be it IIT Kharagpur, different universities. So please stay tuned on it. We are in talks with professors and seeing how we could incorporate this in India. In addition to that, I would say that practical experience is also as important in addition to theoretical knowledge. And for that also, we keep visiting research institutes and we talk to them about, how they could support entrepreneurs in developing their products through their pilot plants or lab facilities. And at the same time, it's the students who can work on these projects to get, very important like practical training too. So please stay tuned, and if you're from a university wherein we have not contacted your professors, please feel free to reach out to us, and, we can have those conversations with your university too.
Great, that's a great answer. And by the way, on that note, for all the early stage professionals and researchers, we are launching a nationwide Smart Protein Innovation Challenge where you'll get to learn a lot about these resources in a streamlined manner, get certification for completing a summer lab, and then ideate on specific challenges and specific themes when it comes to plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy to start with, and other plant-based ingredients. So just wait for it for a month or so. You'll see more notifications from our social media handles. Dhruvi, the next question is for you. People, investors, or people from corporate often ask this question that what are possible good investment areas in this sector? So do you have some insights on that?
Yeah, sure. So, see, one thing that everybody needs to understand is that the sector is fairly nascent world over, and especially in India, right? So, if we just look at numbers, I think there must be probably around 50 startups in India across the different spectrums that are there in the sector, and maybe world over there were 212 deals as of last year. So we can safely assume there are around 300 to 350 startups in total. So that, I mean, if you just compare this to other industries, it's clear that it's a really good space because it's just starting. So it's like a sunrise sector that's about to emerge. Now looking at different parts of it and, where each of them stand, I think in India, there have already been a couple of startups within the plant-based dairy space. We definitely know of a few who are working within ingredients, which is great because then you can supply to so many other B2C companies. There are definitely some companies, but they're very few in number, and we would, I think, definitely like a lot more within the B2B space. So these are people who will be co-manufacturing for other brands. And again, this gives them a lot of room and flexibility, right, within their own business plan. There are huge white spaces here, and a lot of what I already mentioned is also white space because, like I said, there are very few companies there, but mainly so within plant-based seafood, within cultivated meat seafood, it's a huge white space opportunity in India, especially also when we talk about cultivated meat, the different kinds of things that are needed to make that final end product. So that includes cell culture, media, all those things are huge white spaces, and where Indian companies can definitely invest in some research and get sort of a leg up. I think one thing also that a lot of B2C companies should try and look at is that this sector doesn't just mean one thing, right? A lot of times we've discussed this, but I think it bears repeating. There are different kinds of plant-based meat or cultivated meat brands that are going to appeal to different kinds of consumers. So on one end of the spectrum, we will have, let's say, organic brands. Like there's a brand in New Zealand called Sunfed, which uses only 7 ingredients, including water, to make plant-based meat. And this is obviously, for a very niche urban sort of clientele. And then right on the other end, we have a need for really protein-rich meat supplements, which can go into midday meals, for instance, which are served in Anganwadi centers in India. So when we look at this industry, we need to look at it from that lens, that there are so many different cohorts of the population to service, which will all need different products. And all of these are opportunities or white spaces for startups as well as for investors.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think that Sunfed example was really nice because we often get this query, is it possible to make plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy without preservatives? So obviously startups largely use preservatives, which is not necessarily a bad thing, by the way, being a food technologist, right? And over-processing is certainly a concern for a lot of founders initially. But I think once you reach the state of innovating with novel food processing technologies, you can make sure that you're using clean label technology and using minimal ingredients. Like the Sunfed example was really nice, and one of the audience members just asked us that question. So please feel free to explore a little bit more about their product. Iram. Great. So I'll move on to the next question. That's also again for Dhruvi. Like, what are the common problems in India currently being faced by alternative protein or smart protein food startups? And if you would also like to tell a little bit from your experiences of talking to some of these startups, or how they should go on about solving them.
Yeah. So I think the first challenge I would say is when it comes to technical talent, right? And when it comes to actual research. So these are both sort of back-end challenges, if I may call them so, because they are more research oriented and more talent oriented, wherein we don't really know what exactly the consumers want, at what price do they want this product, because not enough research has been done. So it's definitely a challenge for brands to navigate that. And this is not just for startups, even for like huge food companies, this remains a challenge. This is something that we're definitely working on already. So as GFI, as a nonprofit institution, I think we have the capacity to take on this kind of research and publish it so that everybody in the ecosystem can benefit and really know how to market those products well. So that's one challenge which we've also tried to address with consumer research from our end. The other one is when it comes to hiring talent, hiring the right kind of talent and having access to that kind of scientific and technical talent. I think this is going to be more of a long-term challenge, which we'll all have to work on together, because it's not a very easy problem to solve. But I think the more we talk to people, the more we go to universities, we realize that students are definitely excited and they want to look at this new industry and they want to look at new kinds of food products that they can work on. So I think it's more to do with awareness and the more effort that companies and startups make along with us as well as GFI to really educate people and get them aware about the sector. I think this problem will slowly also get solved. The other two challenges that I would like to outline are more like opportunities within themselves, actually. One is mainly access to cost-friendly ingredients for food formulation. Now, this is also an opportunity because a lot of companies can begin to manufacture these ingredients and become suppliers to other startups, right? And the other big bottleneck, I think, is technical know-how, which I think can be solved with partnerships with a lot of academic institutions and universities and trying to work with them on a contract research basis or just in partnership. So I think these are all solvable problems and we're in progress of doing them.
Yeah, certainly, like universities and technical consultants. So increasingly, a lot of them have. By the way, we have a couple of initiatives here. And Siddharth, do you want to tell some of our members of what we are trying to do to solve for having more vendors and more value chain stakeholders to provide specific services around ingredients, equipment, stuff like that. On Dhruvi's point.
Yeah, so one of our biggest initiatives is creating a value chain data stakeholder database, wherein and I think Shardul must have shared access to this with all of you in the community, wherein we are trying to basically talk to a lot of these stakeholders, like ingredient suppliers or co-manufacturers, or food R&D consultants, trying to talk to them about this field and how they can contribute, and putting everything together in the form of like Excel sheet, so that people can connect with each other. And to Dhruvi's point, right, there would be probably a few players who are making starches or some other food products, but they could apply their technology to even create like functional plant protein isolates. So we are talking to them about that. We are connecting them with like the white paper articles or research articles on how a pea protein isolate could be made, etc. And initiatives like these, which is going to help the community at large.
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth. And just a point there, if you are a solution provider in this industry with some technical expertise, whether it's in proteins or other aspects of developing products in this sector which can pertain to plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy, please reach out to Siddharth so that we can include you, right? And we see this often. There are people who have some expertise in one specific area, like equipments or ingredients, but they have no understanding of how to go on about creating a B2C brand, where entrepreneurs have that specific knowledge. They have created companies in the past, but don't have the other piece, which is the technical know-how. So that's why I think collaboration right at the very start of such a industry, which is Sunrise, is super important, which we keep on repeating every time. And I think just going through our database, understanding what people are providing, and reaching out proactively to them, putting in messages in the LinkedIn group around what you're offering, what you're looking for, is super useful. Great. I'll move on to the new question. So Siddharth, like some questions in the comments and also for what we received were, how can academia help, right, in terms of specific infrastructure or know-how in this smart protein space? And how can technology transfer be made more quicker in terms of, especially Indian universities where we know the problems of technology transfer are pertinent?
Yeah, so there are two aspects to this, like Chadal. Like one is like, universities and professors, they could work on a lot of projects within this area on how to create like a functional plant protein ingredient, which functionality matters the most, or are there any indigenous crops in India for whose protein we have not extracted or functionalized, and create a lot of like open access research. And for this, we work with them in terms of identification of different research grants that are available around the world, right? And our GFI team in the US has actually created a very good airtapeable database, which highlights, okay, which department is giving out which grants, and what is the topic that you need to be in to apply for that grant. So we are doing something similar in India too, within like say MOFPI or within Ministry of Science and Technology, just identifying those areas where researchers could apply grants for to create white paper resources. Secondly is also in terms of tech transfer, I think academia plays a big role, because a lot of times when entrepreneurs want to start their food companies and they have a certain concept in mind.
We definitely know for few who are working within ingredients, which is great because then you can supply to so many other B2C companies. There are definitely some companies, but they're very few in number, and we would, I think, definitely like a lot more within the B2B space. So these are people who will be co-manufacturing for other brands. And again, this gives them a lot of room and flexibility, right, within their own business plan. There are huge white spaces here, and a lot of what I already mentioned is also white space because, like I said, there are very few companies there, but mainly so within plant-based seafood, within cultivated meat seafood, it's a huge white space opportunity in India, especially also when we talk about cultivated meat, the different kinds of things that are needed to make that final end product. So that includes cell culture, media, all those things are huge white spaces, and the Indian companies can definitely invest in some research and get sort of a leg up. I think one thing also that a lot of B2C companies should try and look at is that this sector doesn't just mean one thing, right? A lot of times we've discussed this, but I think it bears repeating. There are different kinds of plant-based meat or cultivated meat brands that are going to appeal to different kinds of consumers. So on one end of the spectrum, we will have, let's say, organic brands. Like there's a brand in New Zealand called Sunfed, which uses only 7 ingredients, including water, to make plant-based meat. And this is obviously, for a very niche urban sort of clientele. And then right on the other end, we have a need for really protein-rich meat supplements, which can go into midday meals, for instance, which are served in Anganwadi centers in India. So when we look at this industry, we need to look at it from that lens, that there are so many different cohorts of the population to service, which will all need different products. And all of these are opportunities or white spaces for startups as well as for investors.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think that Sunfed example was really nice because we often get this query, is it possible to make plant-based meat, eggs and dairy without preservatives? So obviously startups largely use preservatives, which is not necessarily a bad thing, by the way, being a food technologist, right? And over-processing is certainly a concern for a lot of founders initially. But I think once you reach the state of innovating with novel food processing technologies, you can make sure that you're using clean label technology and using minimal ingredients. Like the Sunfed example was really nice. And one of the audience members just asked us that question, so please feel free to explore a little bit more about their product. Great. So I'll move on to the next question. That's also again for Dhruvi. Like, what are the common problems in India currently being faced by alternative protein or smart protein food startups? And if you would also like to tell a little bit from your experiences of talking to some of these startups, or how they should go on about solving them.
Yeah. So I think the first challenge I would say is when it comes to technical talent, right? And when it comes to actual research. So these are both sort of back-end challenges, if I may call them so, because they are more research oriented and more talent oriented, wherein we don't really know what exactly the consumers want, at what price do they want this product, because not enough research has been done. So it's definitely a challenge for brands to navigate that. And this is not just for startups, even for like huge food companies, this remains a challenge. This is something that we're definitely working on already. So as GFI, as a nonprofit institution, I think we have the capacity to take on this kind of research and publish it so that everybody in the ecosystem can benefit and really know how to market those products well. So that's one challenge which we've also tried to address with consumer research from our end. The other one is when it comes to hiring talent, hiring the right kind of talent and having access to that kind of scientific and technical talent. I think this is going to be more of a long-term challenge, which we'll all have to work on together, because it's not a very easy problem to solve. But I think the more we talk to people, the more we go to universities, we realize that students are definitely excited and they want to look at this new industry and they want to look at new kinds of food products that they can work on. So I think it's more to do with awareness and the more effort that companies and startups make along with us as well as GFI to really educate people and get them aware about the sector. I think this problem will slowly also get solved. The other two challenges that I would like to outline are more like opportunities within themselves, actually. One is mainly access to cost-friendly ingredients for food formulation. Now, this is also an opportunity because a lot of companies can begin to manufacture these ingredients and become suppliers to other startups, right? And the other big bottleneck, I think, is technical know-how, which I think can be solved with partnerships with a lot of academic institutions and universities and trying to work with them on a contract research basis or just in partnership. So I think these are all solvable problems and we're in progress of doing them.
Yeah, certainly, like universities and technical consultants. So increasingly, a lot of them have. By the way, we have a couple of initiatives here. And Siddharth, do you want to tell some of our members of what we are trying to do to solve for having more vendors and more value chain stakeholders to provide specific services around ingredients, equipment, stuff like that. On Dhruvi's point.
Yeah, so one of our biggest initiatives is creating a value chain data stakeholder database, wherein and I think Shardul must have shared access to this with all of you in the community, wherein we are trying to basically talk to a lot of these stakeholders, like ingredient suppliers or co-manufacturers, or food R&D consultants, trying to talk to them about this field and how they can contribute, and putting everything together in the form of like Excel sheet, so that people can connect with each other. And to Dhruvi's point, right, there would be probably a few players who are making starches or some other food products, but they could apply their technology to even create like functional plant protein isolates. So we are talking to them about that. We are connecting them with like the white paper articles or research articles on how a pea protein isolate could be made, etc. And initiatives like these, which is going to help the community at large.
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth. And just a point there, if you are a solution provider in this industry with some technical expertise, whether it's in proteins or other aspects of developing products in this sector which can pertain to plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy, please reach out to Siddharth so that we can include you, right? And we see this often. There are people who have some expertise in one specific area, like equipments or ingredients, but they have no understanding of how to go on about creating a B2C brand, where entrepreneurs have that specific knowledge. They have created companies in the past, but don't have the other piece, which is the technical know-how. So that's why I think collaboration right at the very start of such a industry, which is Sunrise, is super important, which we keep on repeating every time. And I think just going through our database, understanding what people are providing, and reaching out proactively to them, putting in messages in the LinkedIn group around what you're offering, what you're looking for, is super useful. Great. I'll move on to the new question. So Siddharth, like some questions in the comments and also for what we received were, how can academia help, right, in terms of specific infrastructure or know-how in this smart protein space? And how can technology transfer be made more quicker in terms of, especially Indian universities where we know the problems of technology transfer are pertinent?
Yeah, so there are two aspects to this, like Chadal. Like one is like, universities and professors, they could work on a lot of projects within this area on how to create like a functional plant protein ingredient, which functionality matters the most, or, are there any indigenous crops in India for, whose protein we have not extracted or functionalized, and create a lot of like open access research. And for this, we work with them in terms of identification of, different research grants that are available around the world, right? And our GFI team in the US has actually created a very good Airtable database, which highlights, okay, which department is giving out which grants, and what is the topic that you need to be in to apply for that grant. So we are doing something similar in India too, within like say MOFPI or within Ministry of Science and Technology, just identifying those areas where researchers could apply grants for to create wide access white paper resources. Secondly is also in terms of tech transfer, I think academia plays a big role, because a lot of times when entrepreneurs want to start their food companies and they have a certain concept in mind, it would be very beneficial for them if they can go to the universities and work with the professors to develop products on the lab scale and pilot scale, use the university's resources to get those first prototypes out, and then they can get more funding based on that, and then they can basically install their own equipment and stuff like that. And that's how it usually works in the West. Is that the pilot plants available at different universities, be it Cornell, Rutgers, UC Davis, they have all of these equipments needed, like homogenizer, extruder. Entrepreneurs go in there, they try out a few experiments, get a prototype out, and then apply for funding or something. So I think academia has a very big role to play, and that is one of the major initiatives we have at GFI to involve academia in this field.
Hey, Shardul, just to add one thing there. There's been a comment here also about CFTRI, Mysore, and all of, there are other excellent colleges in India as well. And yeah, I agree, CFTRI, Mysore is excellent. One thing we've noticed with many of the entrepreneurs who work with us, whether they're in our sector already or whether they're trying to make products in our sector, one of the issues with working with academia in India is that they don't have as many resources as the universities overseas. So this is a very ground level tip. You will need to hire your own person inside the university ecosystem. You'll have to pay a researcher to go and embed themselves there and carry out your project for you. Because relying on the professors and the people who are already performing other duties within the academic ecosystem is not going to get you very far, unfortunately.
Yep, very true. So yeah, some of these universities which have pilot plants and kind of infrastructure, which probably even private consultants don't have, it's usually a good idea to go and meet their technology transfer departments and kind of figure out and be very honest and upfront about the timelines that you're expecting them to deliver on. And if it's not really possible, which is largely the case for a lot of academicians because they have so much other workload, like Varun said, hiring a PhD student as an intern, usually MTech students, BTech students, PhD students are definitely looking for 5-6 months of internship. So having them on board to do these experiments is usually a way around this.
Yeah, totally agree with Varun and Shardul over there.
Just a second, I have some noise in the background. Would you mind taking the next question, Siddharth?
Yeah. So I was saying totally agree with Shardul and Varun, because even in few of the projects we are executing right now, we are also facing some of the similar issues that are being pointed out, and again we are trying to find ways of working around it, which could include just hiring someone internally and then working with these institutes and placing the person at the institute and getting the experiments done. So the next question we had was around plant-based sector. Will plant-based sector lead to unethical practices like it happened in the meat industry, over the years? So I would say that, in terms of unethical practices, couple of them, right? One was a lot of times antibiotics were being pumped into animals so that they don't fall sick and, they give a good yield. And secondly, it would be like overcrowding, right? Like if you have a certain space where only 10 animals were supposed to be kept, 100 were kept, again, for higher yields. These issues, just if you're growing plant-based, crops basically won't really exist. Having said that, there could be some other issues coming out of it, right? Like in order to increase yield, like, use of fertilizers, which are banned, or higher pesticide residue, etc. But I feel that FSSAI is doing a really good job of regulating, these aspects. And no matter which industry, I think it needs to follow the rules. Yes, that would be my answer to that one. The next.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, there are some comments as well which we can address once we finish and go through the sequence of some of the pre-decided questions. So Dhruvi, next question is for you. Let's just say there are entrepreneurs who are trying to import products in, or they are non-resident Indians who have seen some technology in the West, now want to enter India as a product market for plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy space, and probably through retail channels, etc. Like, what are some tips or pointers for them? Who are, such entrepreneurs are there in our community. So I think this theme arises from their questions.
Right. So, firstly, this is a good idea because, when you're in another region, and basically when you're located out of two regions, where you're looking at one region and you want to do business in another, you can leverage both regions' resources, right? So you can leverage a market say for instance in Dubai or somewhere in and around Singapore and Hong Kong, and still look at manufacturing in India to make it cheaper. So, there are different ways to leverage this, but the one important point is that every region, especially when you're looking at India and manufacturing there, has its own nuances, and they're very cultural and they have a lot of local context, right? So having someone here, either again on a consultant basis or with in the form of a JV or a partnership of some kind, who can really help you navigate those local loopholes would be very, very helpful. I would not suggest just doing this completely, from abroad and just running that operation there without having any Indian firm helping you do so. Because, whether it is FSSAI, figuring out what those regulations really mean, to also look at the different issues in and around real estate and manufacturing, you need someone who's well versed with local nuances to help you out. So collaborations, basically. Yeah, collaborating is the way to go.
Makes a lot of sense, especially when it comes to regulations of importing products, etc. Like, we cannot tell this enough to entrepreneurs to hire somebody who really understands the regulatory landscape, because just general advice and educating yourself has not really helped a lot of entrepreneurs in the past for navigating this. There is this question around GST. Like, this was, I think, a recurring question even in our last webinar, where Abhay and Spurti brought it up, that plant-based dairy products were being charged 18% GST, where the dairy equivalent was 5%, like animal source dairy. So there are ways of, are there any possible suggestions or ways of how this can change in the near future, or how entrepreneurs should go on about this as a community?
Yeah, we definitely recognize this to be an issue and a challenge. So I empathize with this problem. But honestly, I mean, this is not going to be solved in the immediate term, right? This requires a lot of dialogue. And there are associations that exist today for these very reasons. For example, CII, which is the Confederation of Indian Industry, which represents industry interests to the government. So we as GFI can definitely be that sounding board and create those dialogues and those pathways for this conversation to happen. But beyond that, obviously, the final decision will rely on what the government or the regulatory bodies think. So I think the short answer to this is that we'll definitely try and take these concerns and represent them in the best way possible. But like any industry, once it reaches considerable size and it is seen to be an important input in the economy, problems are solved quicker. Yeah, that's it from my end, Shardul, for this question.
Shardul, you're on mute. I don't know if you know.
I'm not sure what. So we'll just wait for Shardul to come back, but I think we could proceed with the questions, unless Dhruvi, if we see any comments coming up on that question, we could address those. So I think the next question was, are GMO crops also used for alternative protein? The answer to this is no in India. GM is not allowed in food in India as of now. But in the West, yes. And again, as we all know, like Impossible Burger uses, the heme, which is, again, the heme itself has GM residues below detectable limit, but it is made using GM technology. And even the soy, what they use, some of the soy comes from GM sources. Okay, the next question what we had was, on the raw material side, what is the technology behind conversion of globular plant cell structure to fibrous animal cell structure in mock meat? Extrusion is, one of the most commercial technologies out there, and a lot of companies like Beyond, Impossible, like even back home, like Good Dot, they use extrusion to make their products and convert this globular plant proteins to fibrillar animal proteins. In addition to this, there are other technologies currently in development. There is shear cell technology, a very interesting technology. You can actually make chunks of blocks of meat, and it is under research at Wageningen University in Netherlands. Then there is 3D printing technology, which again uses micro extrusion. There's a company called Nova Meats based out of Spain, who has been using this, who have used this technology to basically create like beef-like products. And then there are a couple other technologies in the process of development, like pre-texturization and electrospinning. And I think it's corn, which uses mycoprotein, which uses a pre-texturization process to get more meat-like texture. So there are a lot of technologies out there, and it really depends. If you want something scalable and good to go, go with extrusion. If you want to co-develop certain technologies, if you have a little more time in hand, then I would say 3D printing or shear cell technology or pre-texturization would also be good to look at. Hey, Shardul.
Sorry, can you continue with the question for a minute or two? I'm just figuring out my internet. Really, my apologies.
No problem, Shardul. Okay, so the next question we have was Dhruvi for you. It's around soya and peanuts are considered to be allergens. Is it safe to make a product from them?
Yeah, I think you have to look at what your end market is. So, for instance, let's look at peanut allergies, right? In India, they're not as widespread as it is, for instance, in the US. So, it depends on what your end market would be and then looking at their health considerations in specific. With soy and soya-based products in general, yes, there have been concerns, especially around estrogen overuse and things like that. But none of these are, I mean, these are just debatable, and I'm not sure how well researched or well proofed those arguments are. And again, it would really depend on what your end market is. But I think there are also a lot of other sources of protein, right? Like you have pulses, you have chickpeas. So if you're facing a specific problem regarding one ingredient, you should look at all the other novel sources of protein existing in India as indigenous crops and look to solve that. But I don't really think there is a big issue with either soya or peanuts in India, because first of all, we use non-GMO soya in India, which is a great plus point, which is also why, in fact, a lot of European brands are wanting to look at sourcing from India for that particular crop, because the US is out for them, right, as a sourcing destination, because they use GM based soya. And peanut allergies, like I said, are not really widespread in India. So if India is your consumer market, I don't think you should be really worried. You should definitely check, though, if you are supplying to the US and you have allergy free labels and things like that, to work with co-manufacturers whose lines are otherwise not being used to make products which contain these allergens. So definitely keep that as a question for your co-manufacturer if you're recruiting one.
Perfect. Thank you, Dhruvi.
Sounds good. Yeah, so we are basically on the raw material section of it, right? So like this is also for Dhruvi, like what is the scope of manufacturing plant protein isolates in India, like concentrates or isolates, which are usually used in the new product development in this sector, right? And which plant protein isolates have the most demand? Like globally, are there any key ingredients that people or companies have been looking at? And in India, could you answer a little bit more around that, Dhruvi?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think I mentioned this even during that question on white spaces. It's definitely a huge white space because, once you become someone who supplies to an industry at large, you have a lot of room for flexibility. So yes, to answer the first half, the scope is great and you should definitely consider it. The kinds of plant protein isolates that we've definitely seen that have gained favor in the media or that have been popular recently have been pea protein, fava beans, rice, a lot of blends. So for instance, you can use soya protein along with rice or along with pea for a specific kind of end product that you want. So again, your end product should dictate what the formulation is, because different kinds of ingredients have different benefits attached to them. But definitely if you're looking at trends, things like algae are gaining a lot of notice. So the more exotic, or if duckweed, for instance, which is grown so prominently in Southeast Asia, there are lots of these things that one can look at, but it would really depend on the supply and what your end product demands.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dhruvi. I think the next question is certainly for Siddharth. Siddharth, can you tell us a little bit about the shelf life? Like shelf life is a very important consideration when it comes to thinking about all three categories: plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. Like what are the usual considerations when it comes to maximizing shelf life? In general, India cold chain is a problem, and we want to develop products which are more shelf stable if you want to reach to tier 2, tier 3 cities. So just general guidelines around that. If you could throw some insights.
Yeah, so as you rightly pointed out, Shardul, like cold chain is an issue in India. It's broken to a certain degree. So if you want your product to reach all the consumers or the maximum consumers, definitely you should target an ambient product. And if you want to make an ambient product, there are a couple of ways of doing it. You could retort it, you could use Tetra Pak technology to go about it. And Good Dot is a very good example of having ambient product. Their products, I think their shelf life is about 4 months ambient. So in that time they ensure that it reaches all the cities, and small towns, etc. When it comes to international market, though, Impossible and Beyond, I believe both are frozen products. And you basically frozen through the supply chain, and then once you open it, get it home, open it, then you can keep it refrigerated for 3 days. What's also important to realize is that retorting technology in general is uh, it's not a very easy technology for the product. Like it can have a lot of impact in terms of high temperature that the ingredients are subjected to, and they could denature and give out off flavors over time. So it's about understanding what are the right processing conditions and what changes can you make in your formulation, or even to your retorting conditions to get the benefit of the shelf life, but at the same time not compromising on your product quality.
Got it. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think a lot of these considerations are also balancing some of the earlier points, right? Clean label versus which technology to use, because preservatives add shelf life, but if you go for clean label, the cost of product development go up. So it's really a balance of what market you're targeting, how much capital you have in terms of investing into R&D, because a lot of R&D solves. And as long as you're ready to find innovative ways of hiring people who've worked in areas of microbiology, in new product development to enhance shelf life, and there are consultants out there who can apply their skills to this area as well, it takes certainly more money. So you have to really find that right balance. Nobody can really answer that question for you, like what's the best approach to go. You might think that you have customers which are going to probably upwardly mobile in metro cities, and they're probably going to consume your products only in the retail shops or food halls, etc. So in that case, a frozen product or a refrigerated product might make sense. Again, a lot of these considerations also factor in inventory costs, etc. So it's really a really rounded discussion which you should have with your technical consultant or somebody who's developing product. For new entrepreneurs who are starting their journey, I think from my own experiences of talking with entrepreneurs, you really have to think of this problem right at the very start. Like after like 7, 8, 9 months into your new product development exercise, if you then start thinking of the machinery that you're going to need to scale up your recipes, about your distribution, which might fail if your product is frozen or refrigerated in India. Those issues crop up a lot, especially in plant-based dairy and plant-based eggs. So yeah, some points to take a note of. I think the next question is for Siddharth again. What are the main functionalities of protein concentrates and isolates that are key to developing really high quality products in this area? And can you talk a little bit from plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy perspective and their function in general?
Yeah, so I would say, if we look at a meat product, right, let's start off with that. I think water holding capacity is one of the key functionalities what meat proteins have, and that is why your meat is like really juicy and tender and nice. So that is something you need to have. I would also say emulsification, because the way fat and water are emulsified in a meat structure, so your protein also needs to be a good emulsifier for that. In addition, just structure building, it shouldn't denature when subjected to different cooking conditions, or denature in a way such that, the texture is off or starts losing other functionalities, I would say is the key. And I would say solubility again, certain degree of solubility is always important where plant proteins usually struggle. So that's why a lot of additional ingredients are used to make them soluble, changing the acidity of the system or conductivity of the system. And when it comes to say plant-based eggs, I would say again emulsification if you want it in a liquid format, such that the protein, fat, and water don't separate. But the key functionality to look for is gelation, because essentially when I take an egg and when I put it on a pan, and the reason it becomes solid is because of a functionality called gelation. So it should have that. When it comes to plant-based dairy products, and I'll just talk about plant-based milk. Again, emulsification, water holding capacity, solubility. These are all key, parameters to look at when you're selecting your ingredients for your final product.
Got it. And I think we just have a question around that, which can tie up really well into this, that what are the specific challenges like functionality and balancing it with sensory aspects, right? Taste related challenges of soya protein or pea protein, which are most commonly available right now, especially soya in India, right? So entrepreneurs usually go for that. Anti-nutritional factors is obviously one. Are there any other functionality or taste related challenges for, some of these available ingredients at large? And how do companies usually mitigate it? Is it like by masking the flavors or through processing them with enzymes, or what did you guys do in your previous work, etc., etc.? So if you can add some perspective there.
Yeah, so I would say there are definitely ways to change functionality of a protein isolate. I mean, protein hydrolysis, is a good process we can look at, wherein the protein is broken down into like the amino acid level, which increases the solubility, and that hydrolysates are typically more soluble than their protein isolate from which they were made. So there are ways to go about it, and answering your other question, Shardul, it was on taste profiles, right? Of soy protein and pea protein isolates and how to mask it.
Yes.
So I would say, there are things you could do in your protein isolation process itself, through which you could get isolate which is more neutral. And there are things you could do even in your end product formulation. So if you reach out to different flavor companies like say IFF or Sensient or Firmenich, like whoever, they usually have dairy-like flavors, egg-like flavors, meat-like flavors which you could use. But in addition to that, they also have plant like masking flavors. Like if you have a more beaniness profile in your product, or like a planty, grassy flavor, they usually have solutions to these. So I would recommend talking to these people, telling them your product, and maybe even co-work with them, have some sort of a project with them wherein you ship your products to them, and their flavor technologists also work on the product, and they find the right flavor masking combination that could work for you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And just on that note, all the attendees should take a note that in the next couple of weeks or so, we are also planning to do a webinar specifically focus on some of these topics, with some of the ingredient players, value chain suppliers of some of these solutions like masking agents, etc., to figure out how certain ingredients can, be used to mask the off taste, at the same time add some texture at the same time. So please stay tuned in the upcoming webinar episodes for more technical details on these. Great. So the next question is also for Siddharth. Nutritional factor is more important or taste from our experience, and the question is also framed like what should be the right factor to focus on, nutrition or taste, while providing a vegan substitute. So any answers there, Siddharth?
So I would say that we always say at GFI that taste, price, and convenience are the three building blocks, or one of the most important things that products need to hit them in order to be successful. I would say even understanding your consumers is also going to play a role in answering this question, right? So just an example, citing off on another webinar wherein it was said that if I'm developing a plant-based milk product, right, and if my consumers are typically just going to be using it a little bit of it in my chai or coffee, then maybe nutrition they could get it from other sources. But then if my target consumer is someone who's going to be having this plant-based milk twice a day, thinking that okay, I don't need to have my legacy bovine milk, and I'm getting all my ingredients from this plant-based milk, then you also need to target nutrition, because you need to have equal amount of protein. But in addition to just equal amount of protein, you need to have the same quality of protein that milk has. So it just depends on understanding who your consumer is, and making your product accordingly.
And if I can
I'll
just add there, sorry.
Go
Yeah,
ahead,
I just
sorry.
wanted to add there that it's also about application, right? So that, like, for instance, milk, as an example, and specific that you mentioned, in India, milk is not just had with, with tea or with coffee. It's also had in the form of paneer, for instance. So you also need to look at what are the different kinds of applications that you want of your product in the end.
Yep, very true.
I mean, yeah, a couple of things. So nutrition is two things. It's two broad categories. It's the vehicle for nutrients that people should be getting. And then it also means, in the modern context, it also means taking out the bad stuff from food that's already existed for a while. So for example, there's a question here from Animesh which asks about sugar. And this is something that's quite common, right? So many companies now, especially with backlash against sugar and salt content and saturated fats, etc., are doing what are known as better for you ranges. And that makes sense. I should say that, when it comes to plant-based, companies like Ripple already have a better protein ratio and are already looking at the amino acid quality and content of that protein, right? So it's definitely possible to have plant-based foods be a vehicle for those nutrients. The Beyond Burger has 4 times as much iron than a regular beef burger, for example. When we met with Niti Aayog for the first time, the first topic on the agenda was talking about fortification and how this could be seen as a vehicle for micronutrients for all sections of the income pyramid. And you all know that that's a key part of our theory of change at the Good Food Institute India specifically, in addition to what this sector tries to accomplish globally. But the second piece of that, which is taking out sugar and taking out salt and all of that, I think that will also happen over time. I think it's really up to regulators to really make sure that companies, whether they are plant-based or not, are adhering to those social norms. And Animesh points out that India has a pretty bad India has a pretty bad average when it comes to packaged foods and sugar and salt content. And that's something we have to look at as a society. I mean, whether inside of plant-based or outside of plant-based. I wouldn't put that all that responsibility purely on our sector.
Exactly. And to add to Varun's point, I think Indian consumers are notoriously known for never sacrificing taste for health. So they want both. And, I think a middle ground needs to be found, unless you're looking at a very, very specific sector of people who will sacrifice taste for health, which is pretty small.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, that was kind of a question for you, Dhruvi. Like, do these products have to be necessarily healthy? Like, in terms of our context of why only price, taste, and convenience is what largely matters. Do you have some insights here on what you were just talking?
Yeah, I mean, so let's look at a few product launches, right? Let's look at the plant-based chicken nugget that debuted at KFC. It sold out within 5 hours. KFC in Atlanta, that is one location. They would have normally sold out of that much amount of their nuggets in like within a week's time. So definitely, fast food or junk food, as we call it, is one broad category in which Beyond Meat, Impossible, everyone's playing in. You also have to understand that this category is accessible to a large mass of people at a certain price, which is why it also works. But having said that, India has a dual problem. On one end, we have this category of people which is upwardly mobile, can afford this kind of food. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who are undernourished and our malnutrition rates are bad. And we need to actually just be able to feed protein to children and to women and to just generally the population at a rate which is again accessible to them. So I think we have to look at the market we're in. We have to look at the price point we eventually want the product to be. And eventually, as a society, slowly move towards better for you goods.
Certainly. Yeah, that's a great answer. So, I mean, largely from my experience as well of kind of studying this sector and talking with entrepreneurs, you cannot solve for all of these problems at once, right? It's expensive to develop functional products. And it's largely seen that people only care about price, taste, and convenience, sometimes in that order. In India, maybe taste, price, and convenience, right? And then everything else comes really on board: environment, health, and some of these things are shifting, and we'll know better. Like we keep repeating this, but we have a huge consumer research agenda underway, and we'll know a lot of these specifics to the Indian consumer, the different cohorts, segments. Dhruvi, do you want to also talk a little bit about that? To just wrap up that topic?
Yeah, about the consumer research, right? That is upcoming.
Yes.
Yeah. So the one, like Shardul mentioned, like I mentioned earlier in the webinar, in general, research is a huge white space in India. And not just for our sector, in general, India is a bit slow when it comes to doing consumer research or investing in it, right? For our sector, it's very, very important compared to maybe other sectors because it can mean so many things to so many different people. And we're dealing with a lot of contradictions. So to give you an example, India has the largest vegetarian population anywhere in the world. But 71% of Indians still attest to be non-vegetarian. But they eat meat very occasionally. So what does this mean then? And like, to which sector will we really market this? Will we market this as a high protein substitute for a vegetarian, or will we say this is just like meat for a non-vegetarian? And my guess is probably both those things, depending on who we're marketing to and when. So to just answer some of these questions, to figure out who the early adopter is, to figure out how to market to them, where will they buy this product? Will it be at a restaurant, or will it be probably at home now via food delivery? All these are very important questions that are still unanswered, and GFI is thus doing a lot of original consumer research to answer those questions. Within the next few months, you'll see a lot of articles, white papers from us on this topic. as and when we are getting insights on it.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dhruvi. Now we are shifting to our last segment, which is kind of end products, right? So Siddharth, this is for you. When we design a product which is high in protein, is it necessary to have all the amino acids in it to be called a complete protein? Like, can you just throw some insights, because this is a very protein heavy marketing sector, right? So people should understand a little bit about the science around how it all is.
Yeah, so these are two different things, right, Shardul? Like, you could either say high protein or you could say a complete protein. But when you say a complete protein, then that means it should have all the 9 essential amino acids which your body cannot synthesize. So if your claim is complete protein, then it should have those. But high protein could be, then it need not have those, and it could just be like, it has so and so grams of protein, and according to regulations, product, can be claimed in the high protein category if it is above this percent, and we have it.
Yeah, certainly. And this is something which is evolving. But if people refer, and some of you are already from food businesses, like there are 7 different categories of claims for labeling when it comes to fat: low fat, zero fat, reduced fat, stuff like that. And I think one should definitely hire somebody who understands FSSAI's regulations while labeling or designing or making claims around these areas, especially for products in this industry. Can we make plant-based meat without preservatives and clean label? We covered some of this earlier and you gave some answer. Is there anything you'd like to add here, Siddharth?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it just depends on your channel, right? I mean, if you want an ambient product, then probably the preservatives what you would use would be more on the quality side, like like the off flavors should not develop as fast as they would if the preservative was not there. But then if it is say like a refrigerated product where you're anticipating some sort of spoilage, then your preservatives could be both like antimicrobials but also like quality preservation. Versus frozen, I would say, nothing really grows when it comes to frozen products. But then, certain off flavors can still develop even in frozen products. So, yeah, I would say that, it all depends on, like your channel of distribution and your shelf life. So if I'm saying that the shelf life of my product is just 1 month and it's going to be frozen, then maybe I don't need any preservatives at all. But if I want a 12-month frozen shelf life, then you're going to start seeing some sort of flavor deterioration at month 5, month 6 months, and whatever, and then you'll need some sort of preservatives to incorporate. So the answer is yes and no, like it just depends on your product.
Certainly, preservatives are like very complex in the sense that if you don't have a very good understanding of it, you should probably rely on a food technologist to answer these questions for you in detail, or our R&D consultant for that matter, because food safety is also very closely linked with use of preservatives or not. That can get slightly risky when you are putting out products which are clean label, which might not be safe through the supply chain, etc. So
Yeah,
those things can kill your brand.
and I would also
On
add that,
checking,
like with antimicrobials, it's not like one solution fits all, right? There's not a single antimicrobial which would be like, okay, it's going to kill all gram positives, gram negatives, etc., etc. So you also need to, decide on which is your target microorganism, and then, use, that particular antimicrobial, which is going to prevent that from growing. And sometimes, if your product is novel, or if your conditions of your product like pH and your heat treatment conditions are different, you might also need to do extensive shelf life studies and challenge studies to prove that that your antimicrobial really works for your desired shelf life.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the next question, the context is in India, a lot of these protein sources are available as flours or, as crude proteins. And people try to develop products at kitchen scale with these flours or, crude proteins. And then they kind of realize that they're not getting anywhere close to developing products which replicate the functionality or the taste of plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. A lot of kitchen scale entrepreneurs are kind of stuck with this problem. And, when they see recipes, they see that all of these successful brands in the West have been using plant protein isolates or concentrates. So can you just give us a comparison of how the difference in these two proteins is in terms of functionality, in terms of other technical challenges?
Yeah, so meat in general, Shardul, has zero or like really less carbohydrates, and you're trying to replicate that. And protein is your functional component, right? It's not the starch in it. And if we look at just crude protein, so if I just take say mung bean or chickpeas and I just grind it and make a flour, it's going to probably have just 20%, 10 to 25% protein, and everything else is going to be starch, fiber, etc., which I don't really need in my product, and I get an inferior product because of that, because it's not contributing to the functionality. Versus if I create an isolate, which is going to be having 80% plus protein, and it gives the functionality what we need. So that is why brands in the West and even in India are using concentrates and isolates versus using just flour.
Got it. Yeah, that is true. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a consideration for a lot of startups from my experience also. So one, you're trying to balance for using the superior functionality of isolates, but there are not a lot of B2B providers of plant protein isolates, especially when it comes to like oats, pea protein, novel, so sources of protein which are not commonly found. I'll say 95% of all the protein isolates which you can find for new product development is soy based in India. So these are challenges you run into. Then you try to import them. Then the import costs are really high. So scaling up is a problem. So that's why this is a huge white space. Like some of the questions were around from a B2B perspective, what is a white space, right? Just trying to be a isolate or concentrate manufacturer and working with these startups in our community to understand what they're trying to make and making sure that your protein kind of becomes a good functional protein for new product development in these areas. And there are other entrepreneurs who are also trying to solve for that challenge in our community, right? So that's again, I repeat this a lot of times, but this is a great white space and need of the hour actually, if you're really considering a B2B business. Great. So next question is, someone who there are a lot of vegan entrepreneurs in this area as well who want to develop products here and they have never tested meat or eggs. So how should they go on about making sure that they're solving for the sensory aspects if they've never tested meat? Do you think that's possible without having somebody in the team who has never really tasted meats, eggs, or dairy?
Uh, I mean, I would say that, even if you don't taste it or have never tasted it, you could always have people you could hire or, people in your family or friend circle whom you could go to. Because I feel like, if I'm developing a chicken product, but if I've never tasted chicken, then I don't understand the intricacies of the texture, intricacies of the flavor, then it's difficult. Or another way to go about it is also, there are a lot of organizations who do taste tests, right? Like, consumer study tests. So, they basically have a panel of 15 to 20 people who taste the product for you and compare it against the chicken product or the legacy milk product and give you suggestions on what needs to be improved, what is your product lacking, etc. So there are ways to go about it, in getting the problem solved.
Yeah, and I'm sure Dhruvi would have some opinion here in terms of
Yeah.
focus grouping and getting some initial studies done. Why is it important for both corporates and entrepreneurs? Dhruvi?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. I think even if you don't eat meat, having focus groups of hardcore non-vegetarians and then people who eat meat occasionally, like dividing them into those buckets, will really help you gauge some sort of understanding into how their psyche is and how the product should develop. There was also another question in the chat. If I can just address it, it's around consumer perception again. It's about how one can find out whether consumers are giving preference to macro and micronutrients and but to how much extent. And can we get some resources from GFI on customer segmentation? So I'll answer the second part first, which is resources from GFI. Yes, definitely. Everything that we publish will be open access, will be shared with all of you. So just give us some time as we're developing these resources. They will cover customer segmentation, perception, all of that. Now, when it comes to asking Indians in specific about macro and micronutrients, the good news or the bad news here is that Indians don't look at food like that. Right? So you'll see even the term flexitarian, for instance, doesn't really make sense in India, though that's the term that the industry is being clubbed with very often abroad. Indians look at food more holistically. So, for Indians, it's like dal and rice together. It's not like I will just have dal or just have rice because I want my carbs differently and my protein differently. They don't divide these things. Some studies have even told us that Indians, though 70 or around 70% of Indians are protein deficient, not all of them really know what protein is good for in the body. They think it's for sometimes healthy bones. They don't recognize it as a core macronutrient. So nutritional literature in general, nutritional literacy amongst the population is very low. It's also because Indian cuisine is a orally passed down cuisine, right? Not a lot of it has been written down like French cuisine. and a lot of people just grandmothers have told it to their daughters, so it's been passed down orally. It's very hard to document, and thus as a result of that and lots of other reasons, nutritional literature is a little unavailable or is low in the market, which is fine, right? Because Indians just look at food very differently. So you have to ask them those kinds of questions rather than macronutrient and micronutrient division. So the kind of surveys you create have to be very well researched and very relevant to your segment. And our resources will be available to you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think just segmentation is super, super important, right? Who your target customer is. If you don't really solve for that right at the very start, your product won't perform well. And it's a really complex science. And I guess like spending a lot of time thinking about it before launching and even incorporating some of that into your iterative, new product development process. Once you have like a version 1 of your product is super important. Most people fail to do that or don't allocate budget to do that. From my past experiences, and that results into failed market launches. Great. So I think we have a
Yeah,
couple of
and sorry, just to add there, one doesn't always have to do a really expensive consumer you can even do this in a small way yourself, using common sense and making sure that you're covering all the buckets that you have. Use things like MailChimp, send out emails with options to people. These are all things that brands have done abroad, and they've in fact said that we don't want to focus so much on advertising on Facebook. We rather understand the consumer first, and they've diverted their budgets to email surveys. So there are lots of ways to do it online. There are ways to do it at your local grocer. So talk to people, or don't just talk to consumers, also talk to the people who are really playing around with the food and making those decisions. So at a consumer level, yes, it's mostly housewives, but also like, who's stocking this food, chefs at restaurants, people who make these decisions about what goes on in the menu. Talk to them, understand, just do short interviews. Mostly all of this would be free of cost, right? So you just have to spend a lot of effort. It's not always very high on cost.
Sounds great. I think we have one last question, Dhruvi, here for you. What should we call these products? I think you answered some of these pointers, but if you just want to tie it up, and who are we really marketing them to? I think you covered a lot of it initially. If you have any other pointers, I just wanted to bring this question up.
Yeah, I think what I can definitely say is that there is one misconception, which is this is only for vegans, right? Or it's only for vegetarians. Firstly, again, these segmentations are not as black and white in India as they are maybe abroad. So I would stay away from that kind of labeling, and bracketing people like that. Also, because what we've seen is that these products are mainly loved by non-vegetarians and people who actually enjoy meat, and they're not eating meat right now for various reasons. It could be health, it could be because it's too expensive, religious reasons, etc., etc. So firstly, making sure that you stay away from controversial labels, or staying away from things that alienate people, being more inclusive. So let's say plant-based versus vegan, right? What sounds warmer as a term? What sounds more inclusive? It's definitely plant-based. Vegan sounds like an exclusive group. So why go into that territory? You always want more consumers, not less. So there are some, things that you can apply broadly, and there are then some things that you need to apply very specifically, depending on, again, your end market, your end product, and who this is catered to. So yeah, if it's catered to someone who's upwardly mobile, who's looking for health, then high protein, for instance, because they actually know what protein means. But if it's catered to more, more of the middle class population who's looking for this as a weekend treat, then just like meat, tasty, juicy, healthy, flavorful, those are terms that you want to use.
Yep. Thank you for those insights as well. I think, do we have any more questions pending, Siddharth and Dhruvi, from the list we had already received? If not, I'll request all the attendees to start putting in some questions from the chat box and the Q&A section, so that we can, answer them in the remaining 22 minutes. We have time till 5:30 mark today for this webinar, as you know. So please feel free to send some questions in. Now we'll just wait for a minute until we get some of your questions in, and then we can start answering those. Yeah, one question we can answer till then, Siddharth, is GFI funds some research globally, which is supposed to be open access at the end when the results come out or when the exercise of research ends for industry, for entrepreneurs. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the current work that is happening, and how do you see that happening in India as well through our research grants program?
Yeah, Shardul. So, we GFI, we have a research grant program, and I think this year we gave out about $3 million. And Varun, please correct me if I'm off on the figure. To like research groups throughout the world. So we had groups, so Varun says about $5 million. So, research groups in the US, research groups in Brazil, Israel, Canada, Europe. To do research in this space, and by this space I mean plant-based, fermentation-based, and cultivated. So some of the opportunities or projects that were funded in the plant-based spaces, how could we characterize, pulses actually, and to, actually precision breed high protein pulses, having a more complete acid profile, better functionality, which could then be used to make plant-based meat products on the crop side, or, in the end product side, like, how better could we improve like different technologies like shear cell, etc., etc., so that they function better in product creation. We also encourage, and this year also we are going to be having a similar research grant program, and we would encourage all the academicians here, or even like private organizations who are open to collaborating and publishing the findings, open access, which would benefit the entire community, to apply for this research grant program. And please feel free to reach out to us for that.
Great, thank you. Um, Varun?
Shardul, sorry, I think there was a question around, I think us, the alternative meat segment and COVID. So I can answer that.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great. Please go on. Yeah.
yeah, so I think this is a really important question because it's a reality that we're all facing today. Um, Honestly, nobody really knows what the world is going to look like or what consumer preferences are going to be post us being out of this. But there are certain trends that one can definitely look at and leverage, right? Firstly, there was a rumor that was started on WhatsApp around poultry and animal meat being associated with COVID, due to which a lot of, chickens, for instance, were buried alive. So there are a lot of these issues that are going on with the traditional meat sector and COVID. But if we leave those aside, because these are really sporadic events and they have no real founding in science or proof, if we leave these aside, the general trend is that wellness is definitely coming up, right? People want to be healthier, people want to be more caring towards the environment, towards themselves, towards the planet. So if we fit our segment into those kinds of consumer trends, it makes sense. Other than that, food delivery, rather than going out to a restaurant, is definitely something that people are going to be doing. It can be a changing behavior. Varun had mentioned this, the fact that meal kits, which were not so popular in India but were popular abroad, may just see a resurgence in India. So one can just look at broader food industry trends and see how we can leverage those within our sector. And we definitely see this as a moment where alternative meat will see a rise in consumption.
Thank you, Dhruvi. And I'm sure, Varun, you have some opinion to add here as well, like how globally some of these companies and startups have been performing in the post-COVID world. I definitely am pretty bullish on the sector, but Varun, do you have any specifics to add? I've also put in some articles and comments in the chat section.
Yeah, so plant-based meat and egg and dairy products are much more resilient to disasters like this because you don't have to have meat packing workers enter a plant and have a risk of being an amplification point for the disease, which is exactly what's happening in the US right now, right? So President Trump has requested that all meat packing workers go back to work, and nobody really wants to do it. You can just go and Google the stories in Bloomberg and the New York Times, and from the point of view of those workers who don't really want to do this right now. And they describe themselves as being slaves, modern day slavery at the best of times. And at this time especially, it's really, really risky for them to be out there. Whereas plant-based products are flying off the shelves. So when it comes to risk, certainly in terms of risk and resilience, plant-based has a lot to offer, especially into the future and during crises like this. Now, unfortunately, in India, obviously, the plant-based sector hasn't really launched yet. So if plant-based companies startups and large companies, like we have some of you on this call today, have the ability to go ahead and launch during this time, there's a huge opportunity, because there's a space which is currently a void that you have the opportunity to fill. The only thing I would say is, look, I mean, your dynamism and your resourcefulness is what matters as an entrepreneur. And this is the time at which those things are going to be tested more than ever. If you look at companies that have been founded through recession periods in history, some of the best companies in history have been founded through those periods. So Ford, GE, all the way through to Airbnb and other companies in the last global recession. And even those companies, Airbnb laid off 25% of its workforce yesterday. But those companies are billions and billions of dollars worth. And this is really a time of opportunity if you have the resourcefulness, the dynamism, the access to capital, the access to expertise, etc. So I think it's all up in the air and everything's an opportunity.
Yeah, I completely agree with Varun. Also, I think it's an opportunity even if you can't make use of supply chain and actually getting products to your consumers because of the mess that we're all in. It's definitely still an opportunity for marketing, branding, and really establishing yourself in the minds of consumers, right? So you can, for instance, just an idea, have like a YouTube series of how to cook your product. Because as soon as people have more access, they'll want to buy food that they can cook themselves at home more. So use this opportunity to shoot those videos, to tell consumers this is how I can, you can really use my product while cooking it yourself at home. So just try and think on the fly and make the best of, where you're at.
Yeah, here's another great question which I personally like. Like there are ingredients which are natural and not artificial, but they sound pronounced like artificial. Or sometimes, just consumer education around ingredients is less, Siddharth, when it comes to food processing, and they perceive them as harmful chemicals, whatnot. How do consumers really perceive it, and how do we educate them, especially when it comes to plant-based proteins, etc., the processing aspects of it, the aids that go into whether it's masking ingredients, preservatives, etc. Do you have some opinion here?
Uh, I mean, it's usually the rule of thumb, Shardul, is that, anything that the consumer, cannot identify that is present in his or her pantry. They think, okay, now this is all processed and we don't want it. But the reality is far from different, right? A lot of gums have been ostracized for the same reason. Like, just because, consumers don't, recognize them. So I think consumer education is important. A lot of times, the way products are labeled also, they have, if they have a certain ingredient, they have a small box or, something like that saying that, hey, this is very common, that is being used in food industry. And really, it's certified GRAS by, different certification agencies. Uh, yeah, but I think it just boils down to consumer awareness, like eventually consumers do get aware of a certain ingredient and then it becomes fine. And I don't know if Dhruvi, if you or Varun, if you have to add it.
Yeah, what I'd like to definitely add is that gone are the days where you can't communicate with your consumer, right? Today, because of social media, there's so much increased transparency and like a two-way dialogue that's happening. So if you look at brands even abroad, like Impossible has this amazing thing on their website where you can say that if you've consumed one Impossible burger, how much of water have you saved, how much land have you saved, or what is your environment footprint and how positive it is. Similarly, when it comes to nutritional literature or education around ingredients, one can actually make use of these interactive formats of technology and of social media and be more communicative, be more upfront. What I've definitely learned through branding and marketing exercises is that over communication is better than under communication. So if you feel that something is a red flag and something is going to come up in your consumer's mind, or you've noticed it via focus group, call it out. Say, do a did you know series yourself and talk about it, and just remove that doubt. You have the ability to do that today as a brand as compared to even 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, and a couple of points since I like to talk about this question is like hydrogen dioxide or water, just saying it, hydrogen dioxide scares people. And then it comes to every other ingredient which might be completely safe to consume because, it has gone through a rigorous process of being tested as an ingredient, approved by the regulator, whether it's USFDA or FSSAI in our case. And then there is dose, toxicity, all of these things consumers might not understand and might think that your product is over processed or not safe to consume, or any other questions that they might come. Whereas you would have really thought about all of these things in a new product development exercise. One is obviously think about it. Like, can you really go clean label with actually aiming to achieve the texture and taste and other sensory properties you want to? If not, how can you use the minimally processed ingredients which are approved, which are safe, and then communicate that better to your consumers? Because as a food sector, as a food technologist, I know that there is a huge misconception when it comes to food processing in general, right? But I think the overarching point here is people don't care that much about it. In the end, they care about price, taste, and convenience largely, and they might, start caring about certain factors like these as the world is changing, and you should be able to communicate those changes or tell them why your product is better, if not just in the use of ingredients, maybe in terms of the water it's saving, land it's saving, climate change, etc. There are so many environmental benefits when it comes to developing products in this sector. Like, I put in
If
the
I may
impossible.
add, Shardul, if I may add there to your point, the question around COVID also ties into this, right? People are now recognizing a lot more that ready to cook has helped them through this time. And it's been okay. They've been healthy. They've not had a bad reaction to it. Packaged goods are flying off the shelves. So we may see this trend shift in consumers' minds maybe in the next 6 months. We'll have to wait and watch. Some of those concerns may get addressed just by their own practical experience.
Absolutely. I've read reports where a lot of packaged goods are flying off the shelf like anything. It's fundamentally going to shift how consumers are really buying products, even in a country like India where food processing is limited. I think Mofpi has been saying this for a long time. All of you have been involved in the food industry. I've been hearing this, the CAGR growth rates. I mean, they are evidence of how consumer perceptions are shifting about food processing. More and more convenient foods are being brought, and I think it's just going to accelerate. This pandemic is probably going to accelerate a lot of that change. Great. Do we have any more questions? I think we. So yeah, one question is about meat
Yeah.
substitutes. So or plant-based meats. There are
Yeah.
different meats that you're trying to replicate. So that, do you have some overarching insights into how should one go on about thinking about their process of new product development if they're trying to do chicken versus mutton versus something else, or seafood or fish?
Yeah, so I would say that like the products are very different, right? Like if I'm making plant-based chicken, my strategy would be different when when compared to say something like fish. And even if people who have consumed chicken and fish, I mean, fish texture is much more scaly. It breaks apart pretty easily, whereas when compared to chicken, where it's like much more fibrous. So my extrusion conditions would probably change. My ingredients going in would probably change. Probably with fish, I may not need a protein ingredient which contributes that much to texture or has a really good structure building potential, whereas in chicken, I might need that. My flavor components would change. So I would say that, all meats would have a different, product development, in terms of ingredients, but, somewhere the approach is the same, right? Like you need to have a good texture, you need to have a good flavor, you need to have a good shelf life. So, I feel the food science principles can be applied, are interchangeable, but the formulations and the processing would vary.
Yeah. I think I can answer one question, which is on what will propel the category. And I think that's also a really good question. I think there'll be so many things, but I think firstly it would be collaboration. So let's look at China, right? Oatly, which is an oat-based alternative milk, as well as Beyond Meat, have partnered with Starbucks to look at that new market. So the minute we see huge collaborations, you'll really see this market suddenly gain a lot of limelight, like it did last year in the US when Impossible Burger tied up with Burger King. So collaborations with big names, big brands, that's one thing that will make sure you see this a lot more in the news. The other thing that will propel this market is just people trying it. I think in India, people have just not tried it enough. They don't know what it is as of now. So the minute you do more consumer trials, you even start small at certain food chains and certain restaurants, and then let word of mouth pick that up and get people curious about your product. I think those two things will really propel the category, along with, of course, that big white space we've all been talking about, which is getting cost-friendly ingredients and co-manufacturers to the fore.
Yeah, makes sense. Any other questions, attendees? We have last 5-7 minutes. If you have any other questions, please send them across. Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a question. Siddharth, can you describe, since Just is one of the largest companies in this area making plant-based egg, very successful product, just general insights on how the success was achieved during your time there, practices, any other experiences you would like to share which might help the community at large?
Yeah, I would say that, like be it at Just or be it at Impossible Beyond, these are all very tech forward companies. So a lot of investment was made in R&D, right? Research and development, manufacturing, because we were trying to do something which no one had done before, right? So, in general, if you are developing a new type of biscuit or, just like standard products out there, there is technology which exists out there. There is, there are people who have worked in the industry, right? 20, 30 years, and they know what to do. And then, you could tweak it a little, you could learn from their experiences. But when it comes to plant proteins, and just to work with them, it has not been explored as much. Even academic literature on plant proteins is much less when compared to academic literature on milk proteins. Like, if you just type casein micelles, you'll probably find 200 articles out there which talk about different functionalities and, how you could, utilize those functionality to get a, certain product. But no such literature really exists for plant proteins. So it was a very different approach, very R&D focused. And again, like we didn't know what to do a lot of times, but we just applied our food science knowledge, learned from our mistakes, built up on experiments. Focus was always on getting the right functionality for the product. The focus was always on, you know, developing a technology that would be scalable. We didn't want to develop something, but then we found out that, there's literally no co-manufacturing facility, or, it's going to require a humongous sort of investment. So the focus was never that. Uh, yeah, so I would say that's slightly different from a traditional food company, because I've also worked at Nestle and General Mills. But then again, I feel this is because it's still a sort of a sunrise sector, and eventually things are going to standardize, and it's going to have a more standardized way of product development.
Great, sounds good. If there are no more questions, we'll be wrapping up. So I'll just give a few seconds for you to send any questions. Okay, there's this basic question. So, why plant-based egg is not commercialized yet? Isn't India ready for it? I know Evo Foods is doing that. Good Dot recently jumped into it and is about to launch. So, what is really stopping commercialization of plant-based egg in India? Dhruvi, Varun, or Siddharth? Anybody would like to take in this question?
Yeah, I mean, to answer this question and to answer many of the other questions, the sector doesn't exist yet in India for all intents and purposes. Like what we're talking about, what we've been talking about is basically ecosystem building. I know that there are companies that are launched that are out there. We had them on webinars. Good Dot was founded when GFI helped to put the founders together. But with a lot of this, we don't have a sector yet in India. A sector is formed when you have the availability of all those ecosystem players, those ingredients, those consultants, those regulatory conditions, those manufacturing facilities, that talent pool, and that is still going to take time. Now, we were expecting several product launches in the market this year, some of which you've named, Animesh, Evo Foods, etc., are doing plant-based egg. And COVID-19 will probably push that back a little bit, but we're still pretty optimistic that over the next couple of years, you'll see many product launches on the market. So many of the questions you're asking now will just answer themselves over the next several months. I also think that many of the other questions that were asked earlier about clean label, etc., I would bet very, very good money that over the next 5 years, that question is going to start becoming more irrelevant over time. The reason being that you're getting more and more specialized ingredients that already have the functionality that you need. So you don't need to add in 5 ingredients to get the functionality you need. You only need 2 ingredients, which automatically makes for a cleaner label to a certain degree at least. So, if you're optimizing right from the crop label, the crop level to have a cleaner label, that's what you will get. And that's kind of what we're talking about.
Makes sense. I think there's also a question on supply side focus versus demand side focus, and our change theory. Would you like to add a little bit context there, Varun, on why we go on about not focusing a lot on educating consumers in general?
Yeah, so I think companies individually educating people is a good choice, because you have to connect directly with a consumer and figure out who is your consumer, learn the most about them, and make sure what messaging works for them is being put out there. So with respect to that makes sense. As far as overall education of the masses, that seems to not work at all. Over and over and over again, to the extent that it doesn't even make sense to do this testing anymore, this specific consumer testing anymore. The things that seem to dictate consumer behavior and buying behavior are pure economic considerations: price, taste, convenience. So what you're offering me, does it taste the same or better? And does it cost the same or less? And as secondary considerations, does it happen to be better for the planet? Does it happen to not involve slaughter, et cetera, et cetera? Those things are great. But if they come at the expense of tasting the way I wanted to and costing what I wanted to, I will not buy it. That's how the companies in our sector have focused on driving their product into the hands of people who are non-vegetarian. So Impossible Foods, 95% of the people who buy their products are non-vegetarian. It's because they focused on making a tasty product that costs at or close to the levels of a beef burger. And that's what we kind of have to focus on in India as well. On top of that, doing education and doing press engagement and doing media engagement and all of those things. We do those things all the time. And we'd be happy to partner with other people on that. In the US, for example, very early on when Memphis Meats was getting started, GFI worked with them to do press engagement. We'd be happy to do launch strategies, go to market, lots of things for everyone here. And of course, I should reiterate that we do everything pro bono and based on impact. So when we're not talking about a financial arrangement here.
Also, a lot of those brands, to Varun's point, had a lot of aspirational value, right? They were not looked at alternatives because they were inferior. So to, rather than saying alternate meat, we say smart meat or like new protein, because the entire idea is to give the consumer something that they are excited to have, that they want to put on their Instagram, for instance, right? And tell their friends about. So it should not be looked at or marketed as a substitute, which is cheaper or inferior, but instead as a good costing aspirational product, a food product that people want to have. So, taking that lens and applying that as a brand makes sense, because then that's how your consumers start viewing your products too.
Yep, great points. I mean, at the end of the day, these products have made this sector really sexy, so as to say. Products are really aspirational. Like, there are so many technologies which are up and coming in food processing, food technology. A lot of them I studied in the past 6-7 years. Siddharth can attest to it as well. But this sector of smart proteins has grown and literally leapfrog, compared to its other counterparts and other technologies. And that's because you're solving for these key challenges on price, taste, and convenience. I think we should be wrapping up now. Thank you so much for everyone who joined in.